Hello, friends. Today's episode is with Brett Ewer, who is the head of government relations at Crossfit, which might sound like a job you've never thought of before. And we talk about that. That's where our conversation starts: is what is the job head of government relations at Crossfit? And in a nutshell, as a spoiler alert, he basically does advocacy work on behalf of the fitness industry to policymakers. And so we talk about that and what advocating for the fitness industry looks like, what it's looked like over the last year during COVID when it's really come to the forefront of people's minds. But before working at CrossFit, Brett worked in House and Senate offices. He also worked for other lobbying and advocacy firms doing public relation campaigns. So he has a lot of experience kind of influencing and lobbying our government officials to do what we want them to do. and he really was hired by CrossFit to do that on behalf of the fitness industry and, of course, on behalf of CrossFit as well. So I would like to have Brett as a guest right now because I feel like the fitness industry of this last year really learned that we need to get better at advocating for ourselves, get better at influencing policymakers for how they treat us as an industry. And I personally just wanted to learn more about what I can do, who is out there already doing good work, how I could contribute. And so Brett gives some really great insight into what has been happening over this last year and maybe what you all can do to better advocate for your own business and industries, both at the local and national level. So enjoy this really great conversation about lobbying and advocacy in our industry with Brett Ewer. Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of Business for Unicorns podcast. As you just heard, today's a little bit of a kind of a delightful and poignant and timely tangent in our conversation for maybe the first time, I think it might be, since we pivoted to talking about fitness only on this podcast. I'm speaking to not a fitness business owner today. I'm talking to Brett Ewer, and you just heard his bio, and so I'm actually going to talk more about what his job is in a second. Let's just welcome to the stage. So Brett, welcome to the Business for Unicorns podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Michael.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I mean, your title at CrossFit is Head of Government Relations. So let's just start with the basics of what is that job?
Yeah, right. I know that's a question I often get is when I introduce myself either to policymakers or I'm just talking casually with friends. People say, why does CrossFit need someone for government relations? And it is a simple fact that most companies have someone who is a lawyer who's dealing with, the judiciary and the judicial branch. When you get to a certain size, and I think when you have a certain level of importance, you say, okay, well, we need to interact with governments at all levels too. So, that's local, municipal, that's county, it could be state, and oftentimes it's federal.
Yeah, great. It's clear enough. And what's so fun on this? Well, fun. I'll put fun in quotes. You all will decide if this conversation is fun for you afterwards. But what's fun for me is that we've never really talked about kind of politics and the broader context in which the fitness industry exists. So I'm excited to chat with you about it today. And just for context for our listeners, what we're really chatting about is this last year of COVID. I'm sure we'll maybe go a little bit farther than that as well. But it's really brought to light, at least for me, I'll speak from my own personal experience, that the fitness industry contains many different groups and subgroups and identities and associations and loose associations. And I think that's become really obvious as we've seen our kind of collective, if you can even call it that, response to COVID. Depending on where everyone sits on the political spectrum, I imagine some people think that the fitness industry was really cohesive in our response to COVID and the restrictions put on us. Other people might think that there was no cohesion and there was no single industry to point to fight and advocate for ourselves as we were restricted by COVID. And so let's just talk about that today. And I'll start with just asking a very broad question, which is explain to me what the industry looked like from a kind of political policy perspective over this last year. What did you see that kind of went well? And what did you see that still has tons of room for improvement?
Yeah, I'd say that the landscape for the industry's involvement with public policy was largely on the state level. Most of the regulation of fitness facilities was on the state level. For the smaller ones, they're not engaging in interstate commerce, so they aren't triggering things that Congress might affect. And so that was where most of the focus was on, and that was useful in a sense because most of the COVID restrictions were coming
Yeah.
On the state level from governors and from legislatures. But when all 50 happen at once, the dam breaks. And so I think, an overarching lesson that the industry should take from this is that you do need to be at the table. Our businesses are a part of society and we exist within that context. And so we do need to advocate for ourselves. And we're not advocating for anything which is particularly controversial or bad. We're advocating for the survival of businesses and places where people can go to get healthy and do the very first level, primary prevention, dealing with chronic diseases like obesity or helping to manage type 2 diabetes. I mean, there is no reason why we should not be advocating for ourselves and for the services that we provide vociferously at every turn.
Yeah, for sure. And really, it kind of, I'll speak for myself. Again, I don't know how other people feel about this, but it kind of took COVID for me to even think about this topic, right? I mean, when I started gym 10 years ago with my business partner, it's never been part of our conversation for how do we advocate for ourselves, either locally and in New York City. I'm not sure what that even look like, or on a state level. Like, it's never been on our radar, but this last year, it's come into very sharp focus that there's a real importance for us to be able to speak in some unified way about what we want and what we need from our local politicians or our local infrastructure. And so let's start with here, which is that I know a lot of people this last year, I'm sure you've heard a ton of stories, have really suffered. There's a lot of businesses. So just talk to me a little bit about what's some of the worst you've seen in terms of business owners really struggling over this last year.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I can't share the specifics of people in their particular circumstances, but I've talked to people on the phone who were crying. I've talked to people who are or might have been on the verge of homelessness or bankruptcy, or who were going through that process. You name it. I mean, that is unfortunately a side effect of, a particular policy to halt commerce for a particular tranche of businesses. Invariably, there's going to be people who lose out on that. And their stories are sobering to listen to, just because it is, I mean, the impact is just so great. And, that is partially what I think it's the fire that kind of spurs me to action and what I advocate for. And I think for what my colleagues do as well, is you hear all of these stories and you think, well, there are serious detrimental effects that arise from these policies. And you can't just listen to that and just sit on your hands. I mean, you have to go do something. So, the worst that I have heard would be, people who feel as though they have no other options left, which is disturbing to hear.
Yeah.
But it is unfortunately unsurprising given the severity of the impact on the industry.
Yeah. I mean, when so many gym owners that I talk to on this podcast and, talk about the fact that, the reason they do this work is to connect people, to make positive change in people's lives. The people they work with are their extended families, their communities, their support networks. And so this last year, for so many people having that just ripped out from under them, I can imagine that some people really struggled when you have all of that taken away from you, that support, that community, and on top of that, the financial strain, and on top of that, the personal lives that have been impacted. That's a lot to take. That's a lot to take on.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, not even just the mental health effects on the proprietors and the people feeling the financial strain, but exercise is, I wouldn't call it a cure necessarily. I think that's a very strong word, but it is integral for the treatment of, certain kind of, just mental stressors. I mean, I think that was, in fact, one of the reasons why the GYMS Act, which we can talk about a little later, was introduced in Congress, is because I think the members of Congress realized, hey, this is having fitness facilities open, having access to their services is good for people. I can't be any more plain about it. It's good for people and it's good for their mental health.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about some of the positives, because I do know that was a lot of coordination across different states and maybe even nationally. I'm not aware of some of those things, but some of the work you're doing. So, what are some of the positives that happened this last year? What progress was made, and in terms of the industry being able to advocate for itself?
I think the industry broadly understands now that we need to have a constant presence, and that it is by having that constant presence, you are effectively almost paying an insurance policy. You put that premium, that monthly premium, toward making sure that your needs or the needs of the industry are always being presented to policymakers, and that they understand what good it is that we do.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a huge one, and I think that through any trauma, like the trauma that's happened to the industry, or that the industry bears now, there is a sense of camaraderie among a lot of people. I understand that many of your listeners might be competitors,
Yep.
but we can all agree that competition exists within the context of making people healthy and well, and that is. You're going to get so annoyed with me for repeating this phrase over and over, but that is just a good thing. Like
Yeah.
there's, I can always try to find the devil's advocate position on this, and it's really hard to do for the fitness industry because the service that we provide is health.
Yeah.
And so, I would say that that's the positive, is that people are starting to really realize that, especially when they look at the effects of COVID on people who are struggling with chronic diseases. I believe it's roughly a third, according to the CDC, about 30%, maybe 33%, of hospitalizations for COVID were related to obesity.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that we can help solve. We're not the entire solution, but
Sure.
But we're a player there. So those are some of the the positives that I see on the effect of the industry, or on the industry, is that we we have been imbued with a lot more spirit now to go out there and kind of grab the bull by the horns.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're so right. It's hard to come up with a reason why gyms shouldn't be considered just kind of essential services, right? I mean, there's our healthcare industry. I'm sure most listeners will agree. If not, I'd love to chat with you. But my opinion is the healthcare industry is pretty shitty at most things. And one of the things that it feels like that fitness does is it fills in the gap of preventative healthcare, right? There's no preventative healthcare. I should say very little that I seem to have access through in my health insurance. And I have pretty good health insurance, and it does very little to give me any preventative care. And that's one of the things that our industry does so well, is people who engage with us hopefully are staying out of the hospitals and needing their doctors less and all of that. And so, why we wouldn't be treated as such is kind of fascinating. But in part because I think there's not been as much advocacy as there needs to be moving forward. So let's ask this, because I'm sure, many people are going to be asking, well, not all of us are CrossFit, right? In fact, most of my listeners, run small training gyms. They're not even big box owners. They run small training gyms that are maybe doing a couple $100,000 in revenue a year, and, there's some of them are larger, of course, and they're doing a couple million, but those are exceptions. And, so we can't hire a policy dude like you. So what can brick and mortar business owners who own gyms, what can you even do? What does advocacy look like for businesses like ours?
It's trite and almost cliche, but policy is set up by people who show up. And if, I don't blame people for not going to local meetings for, like, let's say, let's say, like, in DC, we have this thing called we have these committees, advisory neighborhood commissions, ANC. You take a city council district and it's divided into a bunch of smaller districts, and you can run for these commissions.
Mm-hmm.
Those meetings are usually pretty boring.
Sure. I'm sure.
and you aren't going to get a lot of people that show up for them unless there's a very particular issue. But in general, what it means for people to get involved in advocating is to be aware of the effects of policy on you, on your business. And, if you want to talk it over with a friend or someone that might be more knowledgeable, certainly do that. And then reach out to your elected officials. And you might get the wrong official the first few times. That's fine. We have so many different layers of government. I've reached out to people before and I've said, you should really talk to your congressman about this. Let me help. And they might, talk to their state rep or something, and completely different systems. So it's not going to work. But in terms of advocacy that people can do every day is to, just pay attention, one, and then start talking to your elected officials more and more and more. Don't be afraid to call into the office. Don't be afraid to ask for a meeting. And don't be afraid if you think that you have a good story about how policy is affecting you. Don't be afraid to go talk with media, because that's their job. They're there to report on news. And if you have news about how a policy is affecting you or a part of society, then you should get involved. And you should pitch that idea.
Yeah, I think those are all really great takeaways, right? I love the idea of, policy gets made by people who show up. And so if you want to start to develop that relationship with people who are your local or regional representatives, I think that's a great place to start. And then when there is a conversation that matters to you, then to actually show up. And, whether that means showing up for a meeting or showing up in someone's private office and making an appointment, or, protesting, or whatever action looks like, you got to show up. What about any, are there any kind of groups, associations, collectives that are gaining traction?
Yeah, so CrossFit's a founding member of a group that's called the Community Gyms Coalition. And CrossFit and a number of other companies, including like Orange Theory, Zumba, Exponential Fitness, MindBody, ClassPass. I just want to make sure I'm not forgetting any names. No, I'll come back and add them if needed. Sure. But a number of us, Anytime Fitness as well, didn't want to forget them.
Yep.
We all came together, and we realized that for a lot of the smaller independent operators that weren't affiliated with a brand, that their voice wasn't necessarily being as well heard as it could be. And so we kind of wanted to set up an organization that could be the tent poles, that, you can spread the canvas over, a big tent, so you can include all of the facilities, no matter how small they are, so that they can have their voices heard, and so that policymakers understand that when they're doing something involving fitness or gyms or studios or what have you, it's not just going to affect the large corporate chains. It's not going to just have an impact on Lifetime or 24 Hour or any of those larger gyms. You're going to have an impact on just the tens of thousands of small businesses that are in this industry across the country.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think you said it's the Community Gyms Coalition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just looked up. It's gymscoalition.org. We'll include that link down below if people want to learn more. But that's great. So if people were to get involved there, what are the kind of things are they advocating to do? I imagine it's a lot of what you just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now we are primarily focused on the Gyms Act, which is a bill that we have supported and endorsed, along with another organization, which is called IHRSA, the International Health, Racket, and Sports Club Association. They're also an organization that you might consider joining as well. And our major thrust here is to push for the Gyms Act, which would effectively set up a dedicated fund within the Small Business Administration to dispense grants to distressed fitness facilities. And there are still facilities that are struggling even now. And this is largely based off of the success and the successful implementation that we've seen with the live venues industry. They were granted a specific fund in December of 2020, and the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, which was another one set up in March, I believe. Sure. So, that's our major thrust. We all came together and collectively realized, hey, what have we heard in the news this past half year? Restaurants, bars, and gyms, and no one's going to Broadway or theater or concert halls or whatever.
Yep.
These are the places that really need specific help.
Yeah, that's great. How far along is the Gyms Act? What's the latest?
We've had remarkable progress. So it was introduced in the House in February, and since then it has about, I think, 132 co-sponsors so far. So that's almost 30% of Congress has signed on. It is more bipartisan than the Restaurants Act, which was creating the Restaurant Revitalization Fund for distressed restaurants to be able to access grants. This has more bipartisan support, and so that's just in the House. In the Senate, the Gyms Act was recently introduced. I think it was on May 13th, bipartisanly. By Senator Tammy Duckworth from Illinois and Senator Jerry Moran from Kansas. And since then, it is starting to gain more Senate support, though things in the Senate move a little bit more slowly than in the House, I think by design.
Yeah.
But we've made remarkable strides, and what I appreciate so greatly about all of it is that it is truly bipartisan, which just affirms to me, and I think to anyone who's observing, that fitness is not a partisan issue. The idea that we are some kind of special interest group that only hews to one side or not is just complete baloney. I mean, we're fitness. Everyone should be doing fitness, regardless of your political affiliation. So we made great strides.
Yeah. Well, congrats. I know it's a lot of hard work to even just to get that far. So congratulations.
Yeah.
And am I right? If people go to jimscoalition.org, they can both learn more about the JIMS Act and get some information about contacting the representatives?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I would be remiss if I didn't just give it an outright plug right now.
Yeah, go for it.
Go to jimscoalition.org /get involved. And that will bring you to a screen where you can plug in your name, plug in your zip code, and you can edit that letter there, or not edit it if you just want to send it in. But by including your zip code, that will send that message to your member of Congress as well as your 2 federal senators. And our request is that they co-sponsor it so that we can show broad support, and then hopefully we can pass this.
Yeah, I can't see any reason not to. So listeners, viewers, just go do it. It takes 2 minutes. And all this is a bill that'll help us get some more funding for our peers who are still really struggling. Just like there's been help provided to other industries, that there's no reason why fitness shouldn't be in that category as well. Yeah, awesome. Was there anything else you wanted us to hear today, Brett? Anything else you wanted to share?
I think the JIMS Act is really the big one, but I'd love to keep up the conversation as much as possible in terms of just getting more people in the fitness industry involved in public policy. I think we would be shooting ourselves in the foot if we did not aggressively advocate on our own behalf. Because again, this line, but what we do is good. What we do is a fundamental good. You should never feel bad about operating a fitness facility when you're trying to make people healthy. We need more fitness, not less, in this country. And so we need to shift the trend line a different way.
Yeah, well said, my friend. Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your work and helping us, point people in the right direction to get good information, take good action. And I'm sure I'll have you back. We'll do this again and see how things are going, because hopefully we can keep the fire that's been lit this last year on pushing our industry to come together and advocate for itself. Hopefully this will keep up as COVID winds down. That's got to keep going. So I hope we can both continue to be part of the solution. So thank you so much, and thanks for being here, Brett.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
Hey friends, before you go, just one more thing. If you enjoy this podcast, you get value out of it, you enjoy listening, please share this podcast, comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. Please share it with friends and family. We don't spend any money on marketing or advertising. And so the only way people find out about this podcast is from you. So please do everything you can to share it with friends and fellow colleagues in the fitness industry. We love making it, and we want to keep doing it for a long, long time. So I appreciate your support. Go have a kick-ass day. Bye.